Hello, everyone, and welcome to AUSTRAC Webinar 2, combining human and tech expertise. So this is the second webinar in our AUSTRAC Challenges series, the second of three. And the first webinar, we spoke about moving compliance from an obligation and a tick box exercise to a mission-driven approach, and the power of this mission-driven approach to motivate staff and ultimately deliver better, more robust outcomes. Today, we're going to focus a bit less on the theory and think about how to actually make this work in practice in a day in the life of a compliance team. I'm Jess Denny. I'm head of comms and marketing at Zapier. Zapier is an AI company that provides an automated due diligence tool, and we're partnered with Courses. I'll introduce our special guests, Marek and Sean, in a second, or I'll let them introduce themselves. But yes, in this webinar, we'll be focusing on how you can use tech solutions and education frameworks that actually help in the real life of a compliance team, and a roadmap for implementation of those. It'll be a 30-minute webinar with a bit of space for Q&A at the end. But if you have questions, please feed them in as we go. We'll be recording it, and the recording will be shared afterwards. So I'll hand over to you guys now. Sean, do you want to go first?
Yeah, cool. Sean McGrath here. I'm a director with Courses. Had the pleasure of working with Marek and Murat and the team for the last 5 years, focusing on practical delivery of financial crime change into businesses.
Thank you, Sean. Marek.
And Marek here, Marek Jurusik, again, part of the Courses crew. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Great to have you guys here. So let's start with where theory meets reality. In our first webinar, we heard a lot of people in the feedback saying, okay, this sounds like a great approach. Certainly mission-driven is the way to go, but we're already completely overwhelmed. How do you find time to transform while keeping up with the day-to-day demands of a compliance team? What's your response to that, Sean?
I think you don't want to be too twitty in the face of that. I think we're all overwhelmed, and there's lots of things going on there. I think it's the same advice I give to anyone. We've got to recognise why we're overwhelmed and ask, whether what we're looking at doing is going to help. I think one of the things in face of what we're talking about is, it's a daunting task to think about transformation programs and re-engineering your end-to-end process. I think there's a place for that, but I think we can look at it not so much as a transformation program. We can look at things as a transformative approach and see how we can work in a different way, doing things that we need to do, focus on those things that are making us feel overwhelmed or making our teams feel overwhelmed, and making sure that we're addressing those at the same time as thinking about how we're actually approaching the challenges that we've got and what we're using to drive those. We talked a lot about that mission and purpose previously, and making sure that's at the forefront of some of our decision making. We absolutely have a new set of options and technologies and enablement to face into the challenges that we have. But I think that shouldn't be daunting, but it's also not, AI and automation isn't set and forget. Require different capabilities. They require us to think about our challenges differently, and they might shift in the support that we require, the understanding who we're working with and how we're working with them, and how our workforce is actually doing things. What we do know is that constantly adding more people isn't going to work. We need to look at these challenges differently. Marek and myself have been in businesses that have grown exponentially, trying to face into serious financial crime challenges and complying with both regulatory and environmental change. And if you feel like you're overwhelmed with a team of tens, then having a team of hundreds or thousands isn't going to be less challenging. We're going to have some of the same challenges that we've got to face into. And we found, and hopefully people are resonating with the fact that sticking to the mission here is a key advantage we have in the financial crime space. There is a serious outcome at the end of this, and a great way that we can look into this. I'd love to find a way to add more hours in the day, find that 8th day of the week, But look, I can only advocate for finding, and prioritizing the work that we have to do with the work that we want to do. And I just think that we should all start, looking at how we approach this and embrace change, but do it in a strategic and thoughtful way.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I think that word transformation can be quite daunting itself. So
Yeah,
actually, I think this process also of using a more agile approach of continually having a strategic vision on what we need to do and when we need to do it, but iteratively as opposed to ripping up the rule book and starting again.
spot on.
Um, Marek, anything to add on that from your side? And then I want to come to you about the AML technology space because there's
Sure.
so much out there and what works, what doesn't when combining humans and technology. But please add on the previous point if you've got something on that.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of reiterate the need for, I think, really strong leadership to say, hey, we want to drive transformation, whether that's iterative or large oneself. But it's about making sure that you set the time aside for yourself and for your team, and that's the challenge. You do have control over the time and the way you prioritize your time and where you focus your time. So there is a bit of a challenge here, but you're not going to drive any change if you don't allocate the time for it and the space for it, both for yourself as a leader of an organisation or for your team, where you need their support to also drive and support the change. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. So yeah, when we're looking at all the different technologies out there, how should people look at combining human expertise and technology for AUSTRAC compliance?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There's just a lot of technology out there, vast amount of technology out there that'll actually be able to do a whole bunch of stuff for you. Um, you know, and I think that's fantastic and great. I think that the challenge though is really understanding your business problem, your business challenge really well. Um, it's not enough to just be able to throw technology at a problem without really understanding what it is. And once you understand the business problem and the challenge that you're facing into, go a little bit deeper and understand the supporting processes, the underpinning processes of the work that actually needs to get done to help drive and respond to that business challenge. And I think it's only at that point in time where you really understand the problem and the processes that need to be executed to support or deliver on those issues, that you can then start to look at the options that are out there for technology. Because your options or your solutioning options may be technology, it may be data, or it may be people and capability. So by understanding clearly what good looks like and what your sort of target end game looks like, you can then look and bring in the things that will help you optimize and do the things that you do really well, want to do really well. So as an example, I mean, if you don't understand a process or you want to just automate a process without really understanding it, by automating it, you just create more problems. Okay, but by really understanding it and working out the fidelity of where you're going to drive the most amounts of value and change, then you can really look at the technology that can help to support you in doing that, or the capability, or like I said, some additional data to support you in doing that more effectively. Okay, and it's actually one of the things that we talked about is really using and understanding your business processes and then helping technology enable and optimize those processes for you. And it's one of the reasons why we really love Zapier as a tool is it helps to actually augment that for you. So it augments existing processes, it speeds things up, but it doesn't actually replace the work. It actually expands the knowledge and lifts the actual bar of the quality of the work that you're getting. So it's a good example of where you can use technology to really support what your people do. Another example is, your team might be executing and have a workflow or a case management capability that helps them do day-to-day work. Well, supplement that with smart use of technology to bring in either the smarts, the data, to help you do an investigation faster and better and smarter. So all of a sudden, by understanding the processes and where the manual overheads are, you can actually use technology to help your people reduce the manual work, the overhead, and let them really focus on the value add work.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's exactly how we need to think about it, really, because I think there is just so much front work that can be done now. I think it's worth sharing as well from our perspective that what we see is that when people think about technology, they tend to focus on cost savings. That's what people think. They just think, okay, we're going to save some money by this. But actually, I think there's a lot more that you can get from technology in terms of consistency with certain technologies. Now, AI doesn't always have a reputation for consistency, but if implemented well and with the right wraparound, you can get a more consistent, rigorous approach than you would actually with a human researcher who might get tired on a Friday afternoon. The breadth and depth of information that you're able to collect, and then all of that comes with speed. And so what we've seen, particularly with massive enterprise clients, is that there are several, they're at once able to analyze a far bigger proportion of their third parties, whether that's their suppliers or their clients, but also move far faster. So to take an example, we work with a large institution that has about 100,000 suppliers. 1,000 of those would always need enhanced due diligence, and that used to take about 7 to 10 days. So that massively slowed up the growth of the business. Now that we've worked with them, they firstly vet 10,000 of those suppliers. So they've actually got far better risk coverage and understanding of those. But critically, all of those get passed through within a day. So they can move far more quickly. And I think it's that message that often resonates the most with the leadership of the business, and adds a bit of color that it's not just a cost saving and you're not just cutting heads or doing anything else. Really, you can just move the business faster. And then the people can focus on those cases that can't get passed through in a day because they are tricky, they are actually high risk. And then that's where human analysts can apply their expertise. So it's a more strategic allocation of resources, I suppose. I'm just going to come then to education. We spoke a bit about education in the last webinar, when thinking about implementing this mission-driven approach. And I know that, Marek, you've spoken about this kind of thing in the past. In a lot of cases, compliance training feels very much like box ticking. So how have you created education that genuinely changes behavior and motivates people?
Yeah, thanks. I think education is imperative, and it's interesting when you go to an organisation. A lot of the times, there's an expectation that, hey, financial crime risk management is done by this team, and thanks for coming. They'll take care of it for us. Nothing else to see here. So I think when it comes to really and truly sort of driving financial crime risk management across an organisation, it's multi-layered. So for instance, there's absolutely a role of your staff, people. I mean, they need to be able to sort of do the work technically. So there's some technical skills that they need to have in place to do the work they need to do. And that's the use of systems, understanding of processes, documentation, work procedures, and so forth. Some really strong technical skills that lets them do the work they need to do. What's also really important when it comes to your people is making sure that they're educated, or they can connect to the work that they're doing. And that's where you can actually apply some good education and training through use of real life examples. Hey, here's a customer that's on our books, and this is how they've been impacted through financial crime. And I think really bringing some examples to light, listening to some phone recordings is also really powerful, because it just, again, creates an emotional connection and an understanding of, actually, this is why we do what we do, is actually to stop crime. Okay, so it's really important to use real life examples for your for your staff. Now, there's also the broader staff across the enterprise, where they also play a role. They interact with customers every day. They see transactions every day. And it's actually making sure that they're clear around the red flags that they need to understand and monitor for, so that they can play an active role in stopping crime. And
Mm.
again, it comes back to the technical skills of, hey, these are the things or the red flags that you need to be aware of. And when you see them, this is who you escalate and raise it to. The other part there is, again, using real life examples in the awareness trainings and education so that they know why they do what they need to do. It just makes it a little bit more important. That becomes less, tick the box here, of more, actually, I'm doing something that's making a difference. And I think also we can't forget that there's also the executives and the board level members that also play a very, very important role here. They need to set the tone for the organisation, and they need to hold the organisation accountable for what's going on. So there's some education there around how is the compliance and how well is everyone enabled to combat financial crime. And are we supporting them in doing so? Because at the end of the day, they need to understand, again, that the accountability for it all sits with them. The buck stops with them, and it's not with an external service provider or a staff member. Actually, if there's a problem, it's their issue. So by understanding that they are accountable for the whole lot, they need to make sure they can also enable people to do their jobs more broadly. And lastly, I do also want to sort of go, it doesn't stop at the enterprise. If you're utilizing and working with third-party providers, they also need to understand the importance of, hey, these are the things that we are accountable for that supports like their clients in making sure that they comply with all regulations. That they've got just as much accountability or responsibility to do tasks and deliver fin crime services that support an organisation to be in compliance. So I think the education in this instance is quite broad. There's very targeted or specific training that needs to be given at different levels or to different levels. But it's all about making sure that there's not just the technical skills that they know, but also that they drive the emotional connection to why they do what they do.
Thank you. Yeah, technical skills combined with the emotional connection. And I think that probably applies all the way up to board level as well, right? As in, there's the accountability, but you need all too often, I'm sure we've all heard lots of horror stories where compliance teams are trying to do a great job, but if they don't have the buy-in of the board level, then you're fighting a losing battle.
Yeah, I think
Sure.
everyone understands what it's like to go through, those training programs and understand it, right? I think if you can pull out examples and things that are meaningful to people, and I think we're lucky in this area that we do have lots of examples that relate to things that most people, find pretty horrible, and we'll be able to have some connection to. And then I think they're relatable to your business. We don't want to give a whole bunch of banking examples when we're talking to lawyers, or a whole bunch of legal examples when we're working with a university. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that are very specific to each industry, and we want to make sure that we enable, the organization. You got to be mindful that for some people, this is, 5% of their job. That they're out there selling, they're out there doing, what might be the core part of the business, and we're out there trying to control what is a risk element of the business that we wish, we didn't have to deal with and wasn't there, but we do have to deal with it. It is real, but it's a small part of, someone's day to day where they want to go back and spend more of their time doing the selling part. How do we make that realistic? Because we also know that those people on the front lines, those people face to face with other customers, whether they're, our customers, the other clients, other members, are probably the best form of information and feedback that they can give into financial crime, informing that real risk where these events start and where sometimes they end. So we want to make sure those people are engaged and understand the real examples that work for them. And so that 5% is really valuable for us as well.
Yeah, definitely. And so have you seen some good stories there, basically, of what changes when that works, when you've got the right technology and the right education?
Yeah.
Positive story there. What can that look like?
No, absolutely. Like, I would just go off the back of that. Like, there's some great stories of where people have run, and we've helped teams run, frontline education, and then you get the stories back from people who said, I was interacting with that customer and something a bit fishy was going on, and I knew what to do, and I engaged with the broader organization to make sure that we had it there might not always be the opportunity in our space to give direct feedback or directly link it to enforcement outcomes and things like that. But I think, we do have the opportunity and absolutely see examples of where people are engaged with that. Look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, hey, just do this. This is the gold standard. These are all the people I've helped, and of course they're perfect. Um, but I think there are pockets of excellence that you see across a lot of industries where it's almost more about the things we don't see when something's going well. You don't see the waste and the rework, escalations. It's clarity in decision making and consistency in response. Like I really like the example you use where, hey, we've been able to enable an organization to actually look at their due diligence process and say, you know what, we've been enabled to do this easier. Let's not just do it easier. Let's do it for more. Let's manage our risk better, not just manage it the way we always did it. And that's the kind of thing that we're facing into. I kind of think about the reason we exist, the reason we're here as professionals is we're managing the grey. If it was all black and white, it'd be easy, and AI would have replaced us all years and years ago. We manage the grey. So when I see it good, the grey's smaller. It's not as broad. You're not getting the same volume of escalations and questions. We've got better informed staff who better understand their people, the process that they're working with, and they're supported by their technology to do that. And I think we've seen some great examples where, post significant uplift and change in this space, that teams have been able to completely shift the way they work, that they've been able to, move from a focus on getting through, for lack of a better term, the widgets, the bits and bobs of the day, and their false positives aren't a great space, and they're working through a lot of volume for not a lot of output, which is a common challenge in the space, but being able to move that dial towards a shift to meaningful cases, and then being able to see some of the outcomes of their work, maybe not direct linkage, as I said, but being able to say, hey, but we spent time, we worked on these things, there's scenarios, there's things that we wouldn't have noticed before that now through doing this, being better enabled by technology, but working our process and being able and working through that, we've been able to lead to real outcomes for the community. It can't all be that dramatic. Like we're not going to rip out every business and start from scratch with some of them. So, but I think, one of the things that I've seen is when we're doing successful change, it's the questions that teams start asking or ask more of in this space. So they, start asking more about risk assessments in more detail. We start quantifying risk factors, not just having risk factors and maybe having RAG ratings or t-shirt sizes. We actually start going, well, what is the weight of this and what does it really mean to us and what's the risk to our business as opposed to what we had in the risk assessment? Do we need to update that? And that really signifies to me a change in the fidelity of how we're managing financial crime and how we understand our risk, and then how we're implementing a risk-based approach in line with what we're being asked to do by the regulations.
Thank you. Yeah, really helpful. Kind of getting behind the risk assessment. It's not just a number or a color. Like, what does that actually mean? And critically, to your point, and you mentioned it earlier when talking about education, I think Marek did, that it has to be relevant to your business. Otherwise, it's just that's when it becomes the tick box approach, when it's like, well, I can't think of an example now, but it has to be relevant to your business, and the risk analysis has to be relevant to your business. And that's also
absolutely
make people care because they'll actually understand it contextualized.
And it's something that's really hard. Like, it's pricing risk is really difficult, and being able to sit there and be, it's, obviously we've got two sides of the coin here when we work in financial crime. We've got kind of a fraud side and a regulatory and compliance side, right? And the fraud side kind of prices itself. If I didn't do something today, I've got a price of what I pay tomorrow. Whereas in the compliance side management, that's a far longer chain of consequence that may or may not eventuate. That becomes really hard to price. But the closer we get to it, the clearer we start managing those risks and why we're managing those risks. No one's saying that they're not going to eventuate. They are risks, and no matter how small we think they might be or they actually are, there's still a chance that they will happen. But if we can stand behind that reasoning, we can stand behind that with data, that we've got engaged people going through it and asking these questions, I think we get to a better spot of understanding our risk and then being able to respond to it appropriately.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to communicate and across the business the risks that you've prevented or the threats to the business that you've prevented, and that's a challenge. Um, I'm going to move us on. I'm going to come back to you now, Marek. To think about, there still might be quite a lot of organizations here thinking, okay, this sounds pretty complicated. Where do I start when I'm thinking about upgrading both my technology and my training? What would be your recommendation, Marek?
Yeah, so look, I think a lot of the times there is that sort of expectation or thing that, I want to drive. Sean mentioned it earlier, a transformational change as opposed to actually just what's our approach to drive change and improvements across our business. So you can sort of, it doesn't need to be a big bang, a huge 3, 4 year transformational agenda. Actually, it could be an iterative sort of change. And a lot of the times when you do invest in your people and your technology, that in itself has a payback. So a lot of the times there is a sense of how can I get started? Well, actually start by just taking some, I'm going to say waste or some manual effort out of the process, out of the business, and reinvest that back into change. Because by doing that, all of a sudden you're on the journey. So I think for me, it's making sure that there's some small iterative steps that you can actually take to find opportunities to remove waste. As soon as you do that, you can reinvest that into driving change. And then you do have to be clear around what that needs to be. So by understanding where you want to go and understanding how much time you can sort of give back to driving that transformation is a really, really important thing for a leader to drive.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Now I'm mindful we haven't got a lot of time left, so I'm gonna come back to, well, hopefully both of you guys, but I think I'll start with you, Sean. Um, we've spoken we've spoken about all sorts of things, but as a final wrap up, um, what competitive advantages would you see beyond just regulatory compliance for organizations that manage to get this right?
Yeah, cool. So I think the first thing to say is that good financial crime management is good risk management. Good financial crime management is good customer management. Understanding your customer, understanding which of our customers we need to look more deeply into, that we need to understand them, is just good management of them. And building that and doing it well builds trust both internally and externally, both regulators and our customers themselves. And enduring customer relationships in long-standing businesses, what we're talking about in the regulated space. You can be a customer for decades, and containing and managing, well, maintaining that trust in a lot of these industries is a key benefit. The other side is the people side. Just quickly, like the biggest challenge that we've had in the space for a number of years now is keeping and retaining talent. Right? So making sure that we understand and we nurture and manage that is only becomes more apparent and more weighty in a world where we need to maintain the talent. We need to keep them, to be able to understand why we're doing things, how we do things. We can, there's dangers in automating away tasks if you're not retaining good talent that understand how and why these things work and why they do things the way they do them. So I think, yeah, keeping highly motivated, highly engaged workers is a key benefit for any organization.
Brilliant. Thank you. I would love to come to you, Marek, but I don't want to run too much over. So I'm just going to recap that. So trust with customers, customer management, I think also managing to onboard people faster, all of that can help. And then, yes, talent is critical to this. I think technology is certainly not there to replace talent, but it's there to make their jobs more interesting. Thank you both so much for joining us. Thank you to our attendees as well. Please do email comms, at zapian.com if you have any questions. And we'll catch you on the next webinar on the 7th of August, where we'll be sharing a case study of this new approach in practice. Thank you both again, and see you next time.
Thank you.